This morning, so we're talking about the experience of motherhood, and someone told me that I can't really speak on that with any experience. And so I've got Michelle up here, who is my wife and who has been a mother for about 6.5 years, and there are many who have been a mother much longer. But I thought we'd get Michelle to come up here first and to describe for us your experience of motherhood, just to share with us a little bit about what it's been like for you. So,
yes, okay. So I just wanted to start off by showing you a couple of pictures, which is going to kind of give you an idea of what I'm in the middle of at the moment. So this could pretty much well be me. It's not, but I sometimes feel like my kids are so close to me. They're like under my clothing and they're always touching me. And this little baby, yes, I know, you laugh, but it's not funny. It's actually true. And I am, yes, like I said, I'm currently in the middle of this. I have a 6-year-old daughter, Indiana, and we have Jude, who is 2.5. And they are a handful, but they're absolutely delightful. And I am feeling very blessed to be a mother today. So it is very fulfilling. Being a mum is really, really fulfilling. I mean, it's the hardest thing that I've ever done, but at the same time, I feel like God has enabled me to do it. So I guess I feel blessed to be entrusted with these 2 kids that both of us have been given, and we get to see them raise up and grow from babies into these little individuals that they're becoming. So we see their personalities grow. I get to see them grow in their sense of humour. They're hilarious. We get to see their sense of humour all the time. We get to see them conquering their fears, which as a parent is amazing. We're trying to help them grow in this world, and to see them face things that are challenging, but then to actually conquer them is just brilliant, and I love it. So I guess that is part of what is so fulfilling, but also knowing that God has given me this role. So knowing that he has really just entrusted these little ones to us. So having said that, it is fulfilling, but my goodness, it is exhausting. It is, I think, on a daily basis, it's an emptying experience. And I say that, I guess, from the start, becoming a mum, it felt emptying, I guess, of, first of all, my identity. It was a change in my identity, and I struggled to figure out who I was now that I was a mum. I stopped working and I was at home, and so that was one sense of feeling like getting emptying of myself. But from day to day now, it's just exhausting, and I have found myself locking myself in my walk-in robe just for a couple of minutes of peace, ignoring what's going on in the rest of the house, pretending everything is fine. But at the same time, I think you get to a point where you just think, how much more can I give to you today, kiddo? I'm pretty done. And you think, who's going to look after me? Who's going to take care of me today? And so then I guess when it's these feelings starting to come into my mind is really when it's exposing. So it exposes my personality, the flaws in my character as well, and it exposes the areas in my life that God is working on. So I think they know how to push my buttons better than anybody else on the planet, and so they are my sanctification, and it is a way that God is using these little blessings that he's given us to really work on the areas in my life. Things like it highlights my lack of patience. It highlights my angry heart at times. So yeah, it's kind of an emptying experience. So, but to all the young marrieds who've got no kids, you're probably like, gee, I'm never having kids. No, it's actually awesome. You should do it. But yeah, so at the same time that we're going through all of this, I know that it is also a changing experience. So I'm in the middle of young motherhood, and with all the challenges that brings. But at the same time, I'm also experiencing the change of relationship with my own mum. So she is now older. I'm no longer living with her. She's not responsible for me, but she's still a mum. But that relationship has changed, and so I also have a mother-in-law, and I'm really thankful that I have such a wonderful mother-in-law as well. So at the same time, I know that at the moment it's difficult for me, but it's a changing season of life, and I think that's really cool. But at the moment, I'm just going to enjoy them being little, whether I get sleep-ins or not anymore. But yeah, so
awesome.
thanks.
Thank you so much. Can we thank Michelle? From what I have observed from the mothers in my life, my wife and my mother-in-law and my mum and other mums that I have seen, this is how I would describe their experience. A mum feels the weight of caring for everyone and keeping everyone together. When you look at mums feel like they have to care for everyone. They see their children, what they're going through. They need to care in some way. They need to intervene in some way. But also, they play this very central role in the family. Where as the family moves on from young children to older children, they have this role of having to keep everyone together. But the problem is, of course, is that she is human. And so in this pursuit of trying to care for everyone and keep everyone together, there is this problem, the reality keeps breaking in, that she is actually human, that she can't actually do it all the time perfectly in every way. And so I have heard many times mums say something like this: I just don't feel like I'm keeping it all together. Have you heard that? I just don't feel like I'm keeping it all together. And so the big question that we're going to look at today is who will take care of her and keep her together. And in fact, this isn't just a message for mums, but also for anybody really. Who will take care of us? Who will keep us together? Now, this really is Naomi's big question in the book of Ruth. It's called Ruth, but it's quite interesting that the story is actually have this very big theme of Naomi's loss and her restoration going through the book. It could very well be called Naomi. And this is her big question: who will take care of me? Who will keep me together? Now, Naomi was a mum in an Israelite family in the time of the Judges. There was no king in the nation of Israel. And this is actually the big point of the book. Not only who will take care of Naomi, but actually who is going to take care of the nation of Israel? Who is actually going to care and keep her together? And so Ruth 1, chapter 1, verse 1 has a very ominous beginning. Look down if you've got it in your Bibles. Verse 1 says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Whenever you see the word famine, whenever you see there's a famine in the Old Testament, it is always accompanied by spiritual decline. There is a spiritual decline happening in the nation of Israel. And so there's a famine in the land. Naomi and her husband Elimelech do what all families would do when you can't put food on the table. They move. And so they move from Bethlehem, which is in the heart of the nation of Israel, to Moab, one of the outside nations, until the famine has passed. We see that in verse 2. Now, in the book of Ruth, we're going through the whole thing today. We're going to do a big, capture the big narrative. What is very important in the book of Ruth is to understand the meaning of names. All the names have a particular meaning. Now, that doesn't really matter much to us. My name, Andrew, means manly and brave. But you don't really care about that, do you? In fact, you're all kind of rolling your eyes. It's very important to me. It's not very important to you. It means manly and brave. But in Hebrew literature, it's very important. Names were very significant. And so the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, get this, mean sick and pining. I feel like I relate to that with my two. One's always sick, one's always pining. Mahlon and Chilion, sick and pining. Naomi means pleasant. And Elimelech, her husband, means God is king. But her experience moving from Bethlehem to Moab is anything but pleasant, as Jeff read out for us. First, Naomi's husband Elimelech dies. We see that in verse 3. Then her two sons take Moabite wives, Ruth and Orpah. But tragically, in verse 5, both her sons die. The three women are now just a family of widows: Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah, a mother and two daughters-in-law. Now, her husband's name, Elimelech, meant God is king, but now he's dead. So what's the implication here? Where is God in this? Where is the king? Who will take care of Naomi? Now, the situation here is literally a matter of life and death. In those days, if there wasn't a male to immediately come in and take care of the affairs of the family on behalf of the woman, then most likely those women would be pushed to the margins of society. They would be outcast. They would have no one to continue on their family line, and so they would most likely die an early death. And so Naomi reacts how most of us react. She reacts as if her life is a foregone conclusion. It's hopeless. There is no hope in this. Hopelessness actually overcomes her. Now, what we saw in the text is that they actually start this journey back to Bethlehem, but they get halfway through, and Naomi has this wave of hopelessness come over. It's all hopeless. There's no point. Ruth, Orpah, turn back. Go back to your Moabite gods. Go back to your mothers. Go back to your families. In fact, she employs some sarcasm here. Do you want to wait until I have 2 more sons, they grow up, and you marry them? She's actually filled with hopelessness. Now, Orpah means stubborn, and Orpah decided to go. But Ruth means friendship. It means loyalty. And she decides to stay with Naomi, despite Naomi's protests. If you want to look, 1 verse 13, no, it is exceedingly bitter for me, for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone against me. In Naomi's struggle, she has resigned herself to believing that the hand of the Lord has gone out against her. She is living in hopelessness. She arrives in Bethlehem. And this is no sneak back in the back sort of entrance kind of arrival. It's a significant arrival here. Verse 19 says, the whole town was stirred because of her. Now, why? The reason is because 10 years earlier, when she was in Bethlehem, she had good standing. She had wealth. She had a family. She had security. But now, upon arriving back in Bethlehem, there must have been something about Naomi's appearance that made people go, whoa. She looks worn. She looks tired. She looks empty. Verse 20, is this the pleasant one? Is this Naomi? How could it be? And she said to them in verse 20, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, which means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Park that in your mind. It's a big statement in this book. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Call me bitter. Don't call me pleasant. And Naomi has descended into this place of despair, this place of hopelessness. Since God is against me, who will take care of me? Who will keep me together? Her life is a foregone conclusion. She is wondering in her mind, when are things going to turn? When's it going to turn? What do we do when life seems this way for us? When life seems empty, you were once full, but now you're empty. Especially for mums here today, but really for everyone. And as I was thinking about what this can be like, my mind went back to a time in my own mum's life when perhaps I was 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that, and I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew that there was something wrong. Mum wasn't together. Something wasn't right. And so today I thought that rather than me try and describe it, I would get my mum to come up and share with it. So mum's going to come up right now, and she's going to talk about how she was helped to see her way through it. Let's just welcome my mum as she comes.
Good morning, everyone. There was a time in my life when I thought I had everything in control. I was a young mum, not a new mum, but I was a young mum, and I had 3 primary school students, children to look after, and Michael had a job and took him away from home from time to time, but overall pretty well had it all together. And so it was a bit of a surprise and a shock when things start to unravel for me. I guess I started to just not cope. I wasn't sleeping that well, and like young mums know, they just push, or anyone under stress in any way, they keep pushing through their day and they just think, oh, I'll be right. So a vicious cycle began, and I became quite unwell. So you do what you do when things like this happen. You go to the doctor, and there was no diagnosis that they could give me. So I shared it with my family that I wasn't going that well. I wasn't feeling well. I wasn't sleeping. I actually lost my appetite. I lost a lot of weight, and life turned really sour for me. And I realised suddenly that I didn't have the control that I thought I had. I became very fearful, and over a period of weeks and months, I actually despaired and fell into depression. It was very bewildering and debilitating time for all of us, for the children, for Michael, but we just kept trying to function. But just the little things that I used to be able to do as a mum, I couldn't no longer do. And I couldn't even get up in the morning to get my kids to school. I couldn't depend on myself anymore, and God was very gracious to me, and he brought many people into my life that helped me through that time and drew alongside and walked with me through that journey. But another stark reality was that they were also human, and they didn't have control, and they couldn't actually fix my situation as much as they were just such a blessing in my life. So the question I had to ask was, who can I depend on? Who's going to help me? Who's going to save me from where I was at? Who could rescue me? In the whole course of that, my doctor sent me to a physician to just get a general checkup, and he said to me, I want you to go walking. I want you to use your energy. I want you to get out. I want you to start to try and get back on track. I was actually very, very weak. And so I did that, and it was there that God met me, because for the first time, I guess it really struck me how mighty God was, how big he was through creation, and how he actually created the world, and he was big enough to sustain it. And it was a very, very powerful moment for me. And then another particular point in time was Easter Friday. It was about 6 or 7 months into this journey. So we're talking over a period of time when this happened. And I woke up on Good Friday morning with a sense of God's presence and a sense of a vision of myself lying in the safe arms of Jesus, and a real confidence and peace that I can't actually explain even to this day, where there was an assurance that God had control and that I was actually going to be okay. And by God's grace, slowly over time I did get better, and he did give me back a measure of control in my life, although I knew that ultimately I wasn't in control. In reflecting on all that, it was when God stripped me of all my self-ability, all the strength that I thought I had in myself to be in control of my little world and my family and orchestrate the life that I thought that I should have. When all that was stripped away, God really showed me that he was the one that I could depend on. He would take care of me. He would renew my life and restore me. As all of us know, that we're never very far away from our next challenge or stress, whether it be financial, relationships, job, whatever. I've been through all of those things. I've had to face a lot of things in those areas. But it's not me that I'm depending on anymore. It was God that brought the joy back into my life when my life turned sour. The answers have never come from within myself, and every time I'm faced, it's a journey, it's still a challenge, I still have the emotions that I have to go through, but I have to depend on the mighty God, the creator of the universe, the one who has me safe in his hands. He's the one who's taking care of me. There's a verse that has always been so precious to me that encapsulates this whole experience for me, and it comes from Deuteronomy 33, verse 27. It says, "The eternal God is my refuge, and underneath are his everlasting arms.
Thanks, Mummy. Thank you. Where is God on another day that is the same as yesterday and the day before, and you've barely slept, you're anxious, you're tired, you're lonely, you're constantly teary, but you don't know why? You have to maybe face those subtle mum wars, constant comparison. It's tempting to believe that God's hand has gone out against you. It's tempting to believe that God has forgotten you. It's tempting to believe that God is to blame. But even though, for my mum, she couldn't sense in some of those moments God working, she can testify that he was working. She can testify that he was. This is the same for Naomi. Let's come back to this text. There is no mention of God directly in intervening in this situation, but there are three very important clues. If you're in the trial right now, if you're in the struggle, no matter who you are this morning, look for the clues of God. Here's the first one. Look at the very last verse of chapter 1. The writer here is giving us clues. Verse 1 said that there was a famine. The end of chapter 1 says that there's a barley harvest that has come to Bethlehem. The famine is over and there is a barley harvest that has come. Verse 22. Here's the second clue. Catch how the narrator is speaking here. In verse 2 of chapter 2, here's the kind of voice. Now Naomi had a relative. There's another clue being given here. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. What's the narrator trying to do? God hasn't directly intervened here in the text. The narrator is trying to tell us that there is something happening. There is work behind the scenes that is being done. Thirdly, in verse 2 of chapter 2, Ruth's initiative of faith, the loyal friend Ruth, she says this is her initiative to Naomi. Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. What's Ruth doing? Ruth's actually going to go put herself out there in the field in the hope of getting noticed by a man. This is what Ruth is doing. She is literally going into the field, acting for the good of Naomi. And Naomi, she cooperates. She affirms this by saying, "Go, my daughter." It's a statement of cooperation. These are the important clues that are happening in the background of Naomi's situation. In your struggles, look hard for the clues of God. For my mum, it was to look at creation, to look in the faithfulness of a friend, of a doctor, to take their advice. Look hard for the clues of God. Look hard for the people that God has placed in your life, the Ruths, the loyal friends that God has placed. Well, Ruth's initiative here, her loyal action, is very powerful. She goes into the field and a man named Boaz does notice her and he cares for her. In fact, Boaz actually hears her story, how Naomi and Ruth have lost all the males in their family, and Ruth has actually decided to stay loyal to Naomi, and Boaz is looking at that and thinking, why? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you go back to your old family? Why have you actually decided to stay loyal to Naomi? He is moved by this, and he's so moved by it that he actually prays this really powerful prayer on her behalf. He says, "The Lord repay you for what you've done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." And so Ruth is stunned by this moment, and she goes back to Naomi with a report on how it all went. And Naomi greets her and she says, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? And blessed is the man who actually took notice of you." And Ruth replied, "The man whose name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi's heart leaps. We haven't seen it leap from the very beginning until now. But Naomi actually says something, there's some hope now in her voice. The Lord's kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Now this is a major backflip from chapter 1 verse 13. Remember she said, the Lord's hand has gone out against me. But now she's saying, the Lord's kindness has not forsaken us. Something has changed in Naomi. She has begun to hope in the sovereignty of God. She has begun to believe God is in control from the beginning to the end, in the small things, in the big things, that God is in control of it all. And she has started to hope in Him. Now, Ruth has met Boaz, and you won't believe what Boaz's name means. It means, in Him is strength. In Him is strength. He is the provision of God for hope and strength for their future. Now, what does this all mean in our trials? In Him is strength. Well, let me put it this way, in my feeble sort of way that I can as a man. I played basketball on Monday night, and we were in this really difficult game where the other team were threatening us the whole game, and it was really close. And it got sort of into the second half, and this thought popped into my mind. Let me tell you what the thought was. I need to take control of this. I need to do something. I need to take the ball and score some buckets all on my own. I've got to do this. You see, that's what I've always thought. You know, as I've grown up in teams that I've been part of, I've thought, well, I'll take the ball. I'll score the bucket. I'll do what the team really needs. But then another thought popped into my mind. I can't. That's not me. I'm 33. I just can't do it like I used to do it. And the will was there. I wanted to do it, but my body wouldn't follow. I couldn't actually do it. I realized I'm not that guy anymore. I'm not the guy to give the ball to. There's another guy. In fact, it's Joel's younger brother, Jared. He's 17. He scored 29 points and he got us over the line. Every time we passed the ball to Jared, he scored. And what I realized in that moment was this: give the ball to Jared. Don't give the ball to me. I can't do it on my own. Give the ball to Jared. How many times in your struggles and your trials are you holding onto the ball yourself? I've got to hit the winning shot. I've got to make the bucket. I've got to force my way through this. We have to recognize something. We can't do it on our own. We can't make the winning shot. Give the ball to God. In Him is strength. Give the ball to God. This is the equation. Mum, never strong enough. Never strong enough. We know this. Plus God, who is infinitely strong enough, equals a mum who is strong enough. Mum is never strong enough on her own. We've heard that from two mums today. God is infinitely strong enough. That equals a mum who is strong enough. Therefore, in your trial, in your struggle, give God the ball. In Him is your strength. When we start to hope in the sovereignty of God, that means we believe that all things are in His control at all times, no matter what. You begin to reinterpret your circumstances. A setback becomes an opportunity. A fight becomes an opportunity to show grace. A sleepless night turns into thankfulness. A negative attitude becomes a positive. Bad news becomes a chance for deeper dependence. Give Him the ball. In Him is strength. I want to tell you something. Don't get me wrong on that metaphor. I didn't sub out. I didn't substitute out of the game. And here's actually what we see here in Naomi. New hope in the sovereignty of God inspires two things: intensified purpose and righteous initiatives. Two things: intensified purpose, righteous initiative. Chapter 3 explains that Naomi hatches the most elaborate matchmaker plan possible. Verse 1 take your opportunity with Boaz. This is what she's saying to Ruth. Okay, you've had one meeting in the field, but now let's back it up with another meeting. Let's make this work with Boaz. Verse 2, here's where he'll be. Rock up at the same place. Verse 3, before you go, just kind of dress it up a little bit. She says, wash. She says, put on some perfume. All right, you hearing me? Put on a new dress. Wait till he's relaxed. Now, Ruth is loyal here, but she takes a risk here. See, in the time of the judges, it was known as a time of sexual perversion. This wasn't a normal thing that a woman would go and make an advance on a man like this. It could be misconstrued. She takes a risk here. But at midnight, she does find herself at the feet of Boaz. This is a bold move. Now, don't miss what's going on here. People don't make bold moves when they're living in hopelessness. You don't have any purpose, and you don't instigate any righteous initiative when you are hopeless. Instead, what we tend to do is self-sabotage. I remember in grade 7, another sport analogy, when I was sort of the main batsman in cricket at my school, and I hoped I would get picked for the inter-school team. But then this new guy came along who was better than me. And I lost hope that I would get picked, so what did I do? I stopped trying. And guess what? He got picked for the team. You see, when we lose hopelessness, when hopelessness takes grip in us, we self-sabotage. We decide to not take even the most obvious choices that would help our situation in favor of giving up. But when we hope in the sovereignty of God, we are inspired to purpose. We are inspired to righteous initiative. Look at the boldness of Ruth. She says this to him, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a kinsman redeemer." A kinsman redeemer was a person in the clan, a person in the family, the extended family, who could take care of a widow if the husband died. Now, what does she mean by spread out your wings over me? This is the statement. Well, remember back to chapter 2, verse 12. Remember when Boaz first met Ruth and he was moved by her and he prayed that prayer over her? Well, remember what the prayer was. "The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings, God's wings, you have come to take refuge." So what's Ruth saying to Boaz? You be the answer to your own prayer. You be the answer to your own prayer. I'm seeking refuge in you. I want you to be God's wing with whom I am going to take shelter. This is the boldness of her. Be the answer to your own prayer. She's basically proposing that he propose. Now, I know what that's like. That kind of happened for me too. Michelle proposed that I proposed. But this is a bold move here. This is a bold move. This is not the move of a hopeless person at all. Hoping in the sovereignty of God, it will intensify your purpose. It will inspire you to righteous action. It will help you face your day. It will help you achieve things for the good of your family and for the glory of God. Hoping in God will reinterpret the tough and make you use it for good. I'll never forget when we went to, one time we were at a playground with Indy in America. And Indy, there was this big giant caterpillar. And it was this big kind of toy on the playground. And I was getting her to climb the ladder and she just couldn't make it. And every time she got halfway up the ladder, this high ladder to climb up on the caterpillar's back, she would just melt down in tears and she would climb back down the ladder. And I was getting angry and I was trying to tell her, dude, come on, be brave, don't quit, all that sort of stuff. She just got angry at me and I got angry at her and I got disappointed and she got annoyed. And then she stormed off behind a tree. And I walked over to a park bench. I sat down with Michelle and I said, our kid is stubborn. Our kid won't listen to me. And so I'm talking to Michelle, and then all of a sudden out of the corner of my eye, I saw Indy march back with purpose. March back with purpose to the giant caterpillar. And as I stood there and watched, she climbed over the caterpillar. She rejoiced, and we went to McDonald's on the way home. What happened? Indy started to believe in her mind the hope that there was in her father, that her father was there for her, that I was there, that I was standing right there in case she fell. And it inspired her to righteous initiative. It inspired her to action. This is what a person who hopes in the sovereignty of God does. We have a saying in our house, remember the giant caterpillar. This is what we must do. We must remember in our moments, in our down moments, hope in the sovereignty of God. Trust in God again. Put your faith in all his glorious works in the past that have seen you through to now. Put your hope in him. Well, here what we see next is another hurdle, but more hope. What happens? Boaz is willing to redeem Ruth, but there's a problem. Boaz explains to Ruth that there is actually another man who has the first right to redeem them. So Boaz is a redeemer, he can do it, but there's actually one who has the first right. Now, isn't this true to life? It's always complicated. It's never straightforward. Good news is often tinged with the need to wait, the need to be patient. And Boaz has to go and settle with the man who has the first right. They must wait. But we see more hope here. He sends Ruth back with some hope for Naomi. And what he does is he actually fills her cloak with 6 measures of barley. So they're in the field, fills up her cloak, go back to Naomi with this message. Now, back in chapter 121, Naomi cried out to the people. Remember that verse? I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Well, here Boaz says to her, to Ruth in 3:17, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. This is hope. This is hope being communicated to Naomi. This is years and years later. I want you to know something here, what this is telling us here, that if you are a child of God who hopes in the sovereignty of God, you will never, ever, 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 ever be left empty-handed. You will never be left empty-handed. As far as the Lord lives, as long as the Lord lives, you will never be left empty-handed. And some of you might feel empty-handed right now. You have been dealt a difficult blow. You are battling internally. You are battling physically, maybe in a way that I can't describe. But Naomi has hoped in the sovereignty of God, and all of a sudden transformation has happened in her life so significant that now she is the bringer of hope. Ruth is in wait, and Naomi says in 3 verse 18, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. I wonder if you could hear that as the voice of the Lord today. In your own heart and mind, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. You could trust in the Lord that much. Well, the next day, Boaz does go and settle the matter, and he does take Ruth and Naomi as his own. You know, weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. In him is strength. In him is strength. Who will take care of mum? Who will take care of you? Well, Elimelech meant God is king, but the king was dead. Who would keep her together? Everything taken away, pleasant turned to bitter, fullness turned to emptiness. But at the end of chapter 4, we see for the first time a statement of the Lord's direct intervention. Verse 13 of chapter 4, the Lord gave Ruth conception with Boaz, and she bore a son. And then the women said to Naomi, the women who I gather when Naomi and Ruth came into the town went, whoa, what's happened to her? They now rejoice with Naomi and they say, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. He hasn't left you empty-handed. He shall be to you, this son shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. Verse 17, the women rejoice, a son has been born to Naomi. Hang on, wasn't the son Ruth's? The writer is telling us God has restored the name of Naomi's family. Who would take care of her? God will. And God has. God is king. And then Naomi looked down at her arms filled with a child. It says that Naomi became his nurse. And how her heart must have sung, with her arms filled with this baby. And they named him Obed. Is this an insignificant name for us? Not at all. The name Obed means servant. And in the last verse of chapter 4, take a look at it if you have your Bibles open. It says this, and from Obed came a son Jesse, and from Jesse came a son David, and from the line of David came another redeemer, another servant, all the way back from Ruth and Boaz. But who? It's remarkable. See, the clue is to remember that the story of Ruth and Boaz is taking place in Bethlehem right now. That's why some 1,000 years later, Mary and Joseph, they travel to Bethlehem for the census, and it's there that Mary gives birth to Jesus Christ. See, relationship with Jesus takes an empty person and makes them full. He is the restorer of life. He is the nourisher of you in your old age. In him is strength. So give him the ball. In him is brilliance. Jesus is your Boaz. He is your kinsman redeemer. You know, a mum must take care of everyone, but who will take care of her? Who will take care of you? I love this. A kinsman redeemer needed just 2 qualifications to take care of the women. Firstly, he needed to be able to afford the price. And secondly, he needed to be willing to pay the price. Well, a bit of the story that I missed out is that when Boaz went to the gate to check with the nearer redeemer whether he wanted to take over Ruth and Naomi, at the very first he said, would you like to take on the land that comes with Naomi's family? And he jumped on it. Yes, I'll take the land. I'll take the possessions. And Boaz says to him, just one more thing. With the land comes both Ruth and Naomi. And all of a sudden, he backs out. Why does he back out? He backs out because he knows that any offspring from Ruth is going to mean a divide in his inheritance. It's mean that he's going to have to divide up all his possessions more ways. And so at that moment, he was able, he could afford the price, but he wasn't willing. But Boaz was willing, and Jesus was willing. Jesus was able to pay the price, but not only was he able, he was willing. He went all the way to the cross, not caring that his kingdom may be divided amongst all those who believe in him, but willingly and generously and lovingly sharing his inheritance with you. This is the incredible news of the gospel. His name is Jesus. In him is strength. We love you, mums, young mums, older mums. In fact, all the men honor all the women here today in the place that God has you right now. And whatever you're facing, I wonder if you might hear these words today. Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. When you go through the trials of motherhood, remember this: in him is your strength.